When Victor King, the restaurant's most dreaded patron, entered, silence followed him like a shadow. Billionaire, yes, charitable donor, occasionally, but to those who served him, he was a storm, sharp words, impossible demands, and a presence so cold it drained the room. Staff had learned the rule: never meet his eyes, never linger, never challenge him, until the night a new waitress walked in, unafraid, and decided she'd rather risk her job than bow her head. What she didn't know was that Victor King lived for challenges, and once she stood her ground, the game between them had only just begun. Let's begin the story. The black sedan was the warning bell, sleek, polished to a mirror shine, and always arriving with ruthless punctuality. It glided to a stop outside La Fontaine every Friday evening at precisely 7 o'clock, the moment its headlights cut across the restaurant's frosted windows. The staff inside froze like deer sensing a predator. "Table 12, muttered Diego, the Mac D, voice low and tight. He tugged at his bow tie as though the fabric were choking him. "Get it ready. No slip-ups tonight." A ripple of unease spread through the floor. Waiters exchanged glances, trays suddenly feeling heavier in their hands. The kitchen doors swung faster, chefs muttering under their breath as they perfected plates that would never make it to Victor King's table. His meals had to be crafted separately, with attention so precise that even a crooked parsley leaf could trigger disaster. The staff had learned to adapt. They traded tables the way gamblers trade cards, all desperate to avoid the cursed seat at table 12. Most weeks, Diego himself took the bullet, bowing and scraping with forced politeness to the man who could end a career with a single sneer. Victor King, the name was as sharp as the man himself. A billionaire with a portfolio spanning steel, tech, and real estate, he had built an empire that thrived on fear. In boardrooms, he was legendary for dismantling competitors with a smile. At La Fontaine, he was infamous for something simpler: cruelty. He could reduce seasoned servers to trembling wrecks with a cutting remark, or dismantle a manager's confidence with one raised brow. The rule was simple: don't look him in the eye unless he speaks first. Don't linger at his table. Don't argue, no matter how absurd his demand. Serve, nod, retreat, survive. That night, however, there was someone who didn't yet know the rule. Eleanor Marlowe stepped out of the locker room, tugging her apron strings into a knot. She was fresh from orientation, still smelling faintly of starch and the coffee she'd downed to steel herself for her first Friday shift. 24 years old, with sharp green eyes and a tired grace, she carried herself with the stubborn composure of someone who had endured worse storms. That a restaurant rush dot her co-workers had warned her in snippets. The job was good money if you kept your head down, the clientele demanding but manageable. Yet no one had mentioned the ritual silence that descended when the sedan rolled up outside. Elena noticed it instantly: the shift in air, the clench of jaws, the way every staff member suddenly seemed to shrink into themselves. "What's going on?" she whispered to Marcy, a veteran waitress sliding past with a tray of champagne flutes. Marcy didn't stop moving. She simply jerked her chin toward the door. "King's here." Elena frowned. "And that means, you'll see, just steer clear." But Elena had never been much good at steering clear. Life hadn't afforded her that luxury. Rent overdue, her father's medical bills mounting, and a string of thankless part-time jobs behind her. She had come to La Fontaine not for prestige, but for survival. She could endure difficult customers. She had endured worse things than sharp tongues and condescension. When Victor King entered, she studied him without the practiced fear of the others. He was tall, shoulders squared like a blade, his suit black and immaculate, his tie so perfectly knotted it seemed carved rather than tied. His face was clean-shaven, his jawline severe, and his eyes icy. Steel gray swept the room with the calculated indifference of a man weighed what he owned, which, by the way he carried himself, might as well have been everything. Staff dipped their heads as he passed, but Elena didn't. She kept polishing her tray, watching as he took his seat at table 12, without so much as a glance at the Mactor. These flurry of bows. "Diego," Victor's voice was low but commanding, the kind that forced ears to tilt toward it. "My table." "Yes, Mr. King." "Right away." Diego turned to the staff, his eyes desperate. Who's on 12 tonight?" No one moved. A painful silence stretched. Trays clinked faintly as hands shook. Diego was about to resign himself when Elena stepped forward, sliding her order pad into her apron pocket. "I'll take it." The room went still. Marcy hissed, Are you insane? Diego's face drained of color. No, no, you don't know. But Elena was already moving, her stride steady, her chin lifted. She approached table 12 as though approaching any other guest. Victor Kane's gaze landed on her, cool and assessing, like a cat noticing. A mouse that hadn't yet realized it was prey. Good evening, sir, Elena said evenly. Welcome back to La Fontaine. May I start you with a drink? The staff, holding their breath across the room, waited for the THUNDERCLAP. Victor tilted his head, studying her. You're new. Yes, you didn't flinch. His words were almost curious, but his tone carried the faintest edge of mockery. Most of your colleagues can't look me in the eye. You must not have heard the rule. I heard plenty, Elena said, unruffled. But I don't believe in rules I didn't agree to. A flicker of something passed through Victor's eyes, amusement, perhaps, or disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly on the linen. What's your name, Elena? Elena. He let the syllables roll slowly, as though testing the weight of them. Tell me, Elena, are you always this bold with the people who pay your wages only when they ask for it? She replied. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but the edge beneath it was undeniable. Round them, the room buzzed with hushed panic. Diego clutched the hostess stand like it might anchor him through a storm. Marcy muttered prayers under her breath, but Elena stood steady, pen poised above her pad, waiting for his order. Victor's lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something sharper. Very well, he said. Let's see if your composure holds. Bring me a glass of Chateau Margaux, the 2000 vintage. Elena's brow arched. A bold request, considering the restaurant doesn't carry that year. His eyes narrowed, the faintest crease of irritation. No one ever corrected Victor Kane. No, no, the closest we have is the 2001. She didn't soften it with apologies. She simply stated the fact. Would you like that instead? For a moment, the table was charged with silence. Then Victor gave a low laugh, quiet and dangerous. Interesting. Most would run to the cellar before telling me no. I'd rather save you the wait. Elena said. Something shifted. Not. In him he remained sharp, inscrutable, but in the staff watching, shock rippled across their faces. She had contradicted him, and yet he hadn't cut her down. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze locked on O'Hurst with surgical precision. Then bring me the 2001, and bring it yourself. I want no one else touching the bottle. Elena nodded once, turned, and walked away with unhurried steps. Behind her, Diego hissed. What the hell are you doing? Do you have a death wish? No, Elena said, retrieving the bottle from the cellar. I just don't scare easy. When she returned, Victor was still watching her, eyes glinting with something unreadable. She poured the wine with steady hands, not spilling a drop, and set the glass before him. He swirled, sniffed, sipped. A long pause, then, acceptable. That single word was victory enough. But Elena didn't smile. She simply collected the empty wine cradle and asked, Would you like to see the menu, sir? Victor studied her one last time before speaking. Yes, I think this evening will be enlightening. And just like that, the silent roll of La Fontaine cracked. By the time Elena returned to the service station, the air was buzzing like a hive. The staff stared at her with a mixture of awe and horror. She had stood in the storm and hadn't been struck down. Marcy grabbed her wrist. You don't understand. He'll test you now. He doesn't let things go. Elena's mouth curved, faintly, though there was no warmth in it. Then let him test me. I've been tested before. Across the room, Victor Kane raised his glass slightly in her direction before sipping again. His expression unreadable. It was not a toast. It was an invitation, and Elena, without realizing it yet, had just accepted. Victor Kane returned the following Friday. No one had doubted he would yet. The staff had prayed he might forget. But the sleek sedan appeared again at exactly 7 o'clock, and once more the air in La Fontaine thickened with unease. Diego swore under his breath, tugging at his bow tie. Marcy squeezed Elena's arm. He'll ask for you, she whispered. He's going to single you out. Just don't provoke him, please. Elena merely adjusted her apron. I'm not provoking him. I'm just doing my job. But Marcy knew better. With Kane, surviving wasn't about doing the job. It was about surrender, and Elena, sharp-eyed, steady, unwilling to flinch, didn't know how to surrender. Sure enough, the moment Victor entered, His gaze scanned the room like a hawk. The Master D started forward, prepared to guide him as always, but Kane lifted one finger, stopping Diego mid-step. "I have her," Victor said, eyes locking onto Elena. A murmur rippled through the staff. The ritual had changed. Never before had Kane requested anyone by name or rather, by presence. Usually, he treated waiters as shadows, interchangeable and disposable. But now he wanted Elena specifically. She approached with her usual composure, her order pad tucked neatly into her apron. Victor was already seated at table 12, fingers steepled, watching her approach as though she were an experiment unfolding. "Good evening, Mr. Kane," she said. "Shall we begin with wine?" He arched a brow. "You remember me? You're not easy to forget." A faint sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. "Shadow Margot again. And I trust you'll tell me honestly if you don't have the vintage I request." Of course. It became a game. Week after week, Victor appeared, and week after week, he tested her. Some nights, it was deliberate confusion, requesting a dish that had been off the menu for years, then watching her to see if she would scramble. She didn't. She met him with quiet facts, an alternative suggestion, and an unflinching gaze. Other nights, it was mockery, subtle barbs disguised as compliments. "Your balance is impressive," he said once, as she set down his plate. "Most women tremble carrying crystal. You must be used to handling fragile things," Elena replied smoothly. "I don't consider crystal fragile, Mr. Kane, just expensive. Fragile things usually try harder to survive." And for the first time, Victor's expression faltered. His lips pressed together as though she'd revealed something he'd rather keep hidden. The staff grew restless. Every time Kane's sedan appeared, the whispers began. "He's obsessed," Marcy said one evening, wringing her hands. "He's going to ruin her career. You'll see. He's setting her up." But Elena shook her head. "He doesn't want me gone. If he did, he'd have snapped his fingers the first night. No, he's measuring what? Her." Eyes drifted toward table 12, where Victor sat alone, swirling his wine. "How much I can take." The escalation came on a stormy Thursday night. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rumbling like distant drums. Victor arrived early, catching the staff off guard. He dismissed the Master D with a curt flick of his hand. "Elena," he said, not even glancing at the others, "tonight, you'll serve me and my guests. That was new. 2 men and a woman followed him in business associates, dressed as sharply as he was, their laughter brittle with money and rivalry. They took their seats, already speaking loudly about acquisitions and losses. The woman glanced at Elena as though she were part of the decor, not a person. Victor leaned back in his chair. "You'll find Elena is very competent," he told his companions. "She has a unique way of holding her ground." Elena felt the weight of the test instantly. This wasn't dinner. This was performance. The orders came rapid fire, deliberately chaotic. One guest demanded a steak blue rare, but hot in the center. Another asked for a bottle of wine that hadn't been imported in over a decade. The woman wanted her salad without lettuce. Elena listened, jotting notes, and when they were finished, she set her pen down. "I'll make sure your requests are accommodated as closely as possible," she said, her voice steady. "Though I should clarify, lettuce-free salad will technically just be a garnished plate." The woman blinked, then smirked, sharp tone. "Dangerous in your line of work." Victor's eyes gleamed. He was waiting for her to misstep, to fumble, to bow. But Elena didn't. Course by course, she returned with exactly what she had promised. The steak was as close to blue rare as the chef dared. The wine, though not the impossible vintage, was replaced with something she described eloquently enough that the guests nodded in approval. The garnished plate was presented with artful precision, drawing laughter rather than scorn. Through it all, Elena moved with calm efficiency, no falter, no flinch. When dessert arrived, Victor leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "Tell me, Elena," he said in front of his guests, "do you ever feel intimidated serving people so far above your station?" The table chuckled. It was the kind of question meant to humiliate, to remind her of her place. But Elena simply met his gaze. "No, Mr. Kane, because at the table, everyone's station is the same." Hungry, the laughter turned, not mocking, this time genuine. One of the men clapped his hand on the table. "She got you there, Kane." Victor didn't laugh. He only studied her, his gray eyes sharp and unreadable, and for the first time, Elena thought she saw it, not cruelty, not even anger, but curiosity, as though he were less interested in breaking her than in proving to himself she couldn't be broken. After the guests left, the restaurant exhaled relief. Staff whispered about how she had survived another impossible night, but Elena lingered at the edge of the dining room, wiping down glasses when Victor approached. He didn't loom. He didn't sneer. He simply stood beside her, quiet. "You think I'm testing you," he said at last. "Aren't you?" He gave the faintest tilt of his head. "Perhaps. But I wonder what is it you think I'm looking for?" She set the glass down, meeting his gaze steadily. "Someone who won't crumble." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Then Victor gave the faintest smile, not of victory, but of recognition. "Careful, Elena. You may find the higher you stand, the stronger the wind." With that, he left, his footsteps echoing across the marble, and Elena, watching him go, realized that beneath all his cruelty, all his games, Victor King was less a tyrant than a man building storms around himself just to see if anyone would still stand in the rain. The evening began like any other, polished silverware glinting under amber light, the murmur of wealthy patrons rising and falling in a rhythm the staff knew by heart. La Fontaine was a symphony of etiquette, precision, and restraint. But when Victor King arrived, the music shifted like a discordant note vibrating beneath every conversation. By now, the staff had accepted the ritual. He would enter, command a presence, and claim Elena as his server without needing to speak her name. And she, against all warnings, would oblige. She never balked, never asked to be reassigned. Tonight, however, something in his stride was different. It was sharper, more deliberate, as though he had entered with a specific intention. His gray eyes scanned the room not just with cold detachment, but with something hungry, restless. "Elena," he said the moment he sat down, his voice carrying farther than usual, "you'll attend me. Personally, no substitutions." A ripple of unease passed among the staff. Marcy shot Elena a look of warning. Diego muttered, "Brace yourself." Elena approached, her pad in hand. She had grown accustomed to his games, his impossible requests. But tonight, she sensed the storm before the first lightning strike. "Good evening, Mr. Kane," she said evenly. Victor leaned back in his chair, folding one leg over the other. The dining room was unusually full, every table occupied, the hum of conversation at its peak. He didn't lower his voice. "Tonight," he said, "you'll recite the specials to me, but not just the dishes. I want to hear every ingredient, every detail, from memory, word for word." Gasps rose from a nearby table. Even the kitchen door swung slower as cooks and bussers leaned closer to listen. Elena blinked. This was no simple test of composure. He was cornering her, setting her up to stumble in front of an entire room. Most servers could recite the highlights, yes, but every herb, every garnish, every flourish of sauce, it was a trap, and he knew it. Victor's lips curved, not in humor, but in anticipation. He was daring her to falter, to shrink, to finally prove she was no different from the others. Elena's pen tapped once against her pad. She drew in a steady breath, lifted her chin, and began. "Tonight's starter is wild mushroom bisque," she said clearly, her voice carrying. "With roasted shallots, thyme, and a drizzle of truffle oil. The salad, heirloom tomatoes, shaved fennel, watercress, goat cheese, and citrus vinaigrette." Her words rolled smooth, confident. She didn't stumble. She didn't pause. She had studied the menu like scripture, committing every shift's changes to memory out of sheer diligence. Now that preparation became her weapon. The entree specials include seared duck breast with blackberry reduction, rosemary potato puree, and wilted spinach, or halibut and papillote baked in parchment with lemon, dill, and julienne vegetable round. Them, diners had turned to listen. A hush fell, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the rhythm of her voice. "And for dessert, we offer lavender creme brulee or dark chocolate torte with candied orange peel." When she finished, she closed her pad, calm as ever. "Shall I repeat them, Mr. Kane? Or was that thorough enough?" The room exhaled laughter rising in small bursts, not mocking her, but at him. Victor Kane, the feared tyrant, had been checkmated. At his own table, for the first time, his mask slipped, not much, just a flicker. But Elena saw it, the tightening at the corners of his mouth, the brief narrowing of his eyes. Not in anger, but in something rarer, vulnerability. He leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the table. You memorized all of that? Of course, she replied. It's my job to know what I serve. No. His voice lowered, almost thoughtful now. Most people skim. You studied, prepared. Why? Elena tilted her head. Why wouldn't I? You test people. I'd be foolish not to be ready. A strange silence followed. It wasn't the oppressive quiet he usually conjured, but something almost fragile. For once, Victor had no immediate retort. The staff, watching from the sidelines, could hardly believe it. The unshakable Cain, silenced not by deference, but by truth. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the last tables began to settle their bills, Victor lingered at 12 long after his plate had been cleared. Eleanor returned to check on him, and for the first time, she found him not as the gloomy figure who commanded the room, but as a man alone in his silence. Was it satisfying? She asked gently, humiliating me in front of your audience? He looked up, startled not at the accusation, but at the fact that she'd voiced it. I didn't humiliate you, he said. You tried. His gaze hardened, then softened again. He exhaled, a sound almost like surrender. Perhaps. Eleanor remained standing, refusing to retreat. Why? What's the point of pushing people until they break? Victor's jaw tightened. His eyes drifted to the window, where the city lights smeared against the glass like blurred constellations. When he spoke, his voice was lower, quieter, as though confiding against his own will. Because everyone breaks, eventually. Business partners, friends, family, they all do. There was the crack. Eleanor waited. My father, Victor continued, surprising even himself, built his empire on trust. Believed people would honor their word. He was destroyed for it, betrayed by his closest allies. Everything he built, torn apart. I learned young that trust is weakness, so I test people. Better I break them first than wait for them to do it to me. He spoke flatly, but beneath the words Elena heard it. Not coldness, but old hurt. A wound layered over so many times it had calcified into armor. She studied him for a long moment. So that's why you sit here every week. Not because you enjoy the food. Because you want someone to fail you, to prove yourself right. His eyes flicked back to hers, sharp but not cruel. And yet you haven't failed. Maybe you're not testing me, Elena said quietly. Maybe you're hoping. I won't. Victor still. The words lingered between them like a challenge, heavier than any menu or wine request. For once, he didn't have an answer. He only stared at her, expression unreadable, as though she had spoken a truth he had never dared articulate. Finally, he rose from his seat. The room seemed to straighten with him, staff bracing for the storm. But no storm came. Victor placed a crisp bill on the table far beyond the total of his meal, and gave her the faintest nod. Not the superior tilt of a conqueror, but the quiet acknowledgement of an equal. Elena, he said, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it. You're playing a dangerous game. She met his gaze without fear. So are you. He held her eyes one heartbeat longer, then turned and walked out, his footsteps steady, but his mask thinner than ever before. The aftermath was electric. The staff gathered in whispers near the bar, their disbelief palpable. He let her speak. To him like that, Diego said, eyes wide, and he didn't snap her in half. Marcy shook her head, almost smiling. She cracked him. For a second, she cracked him. From that night on, Victor Cain was no longer the untouchable storm he had always been. He was still sharp, still formidable, still the man who commanded fear wherever he went. But at La Fontaine, in Elena's presence, something had shifted. The staff saw it. The guests sensed it, and Elena herself knew it. The armor was not impenetrable. Beneath the steel, there was a man scarred by betrayal, hiding his fragility behind cruelty, and she was the first to expose it. By the time autumn settled over the city, the legend of Victor Cain and the waitress had already begun to circulate within La Fontaine's staff like whispered folklore. They spoke of her quietly in the kitchen, between the hiss of sauté pans and the clatter of knives. Elena, the one who made him pause. Elena, the one he couldn't break. But legends had a way of attracting storms. On a crisp Friday evening, Victor arrived not alone, but flanked by 3 business associates. They were men cut from the same cloth as him, steel gray suits, watches that cost more than cars, voices sharpened by power. The Mactor D hurried to greet them, But Victor waved him aside. "She'll serve us," he said simply, gesturing toward Elena. And so the trap was set. The dining room was full that night. A mix of wealthy regulars and newcomers eager for prestige. Candlelight flickered, silver glowed, and the room buzzed with the hum of polite conversation. But when Victor Kane and his companions took their seats at table 12, the air shifted. It wasn't just dinner, it was theater. And Elena had been cast as the star in a play she hadn't auditioned for. Marcy caught her arm as she passed. "Don't let them corner you, Lena. They'll try." Elena only smoothed her apron. "Let them," she approached with her usual poise. Pad in hand, eyes steady, the men turned to watch her with a mix of amusement and curiosity, while Victor leaned back, silent, a conductor awaiting the first note of his performance. "Gentlemen," Elena said warmly, "welcome to La Fontaine. May I start you off with wine this evening?" One of the men grinned wolfishly. "Bring us your rarest bottle. Price is no issue." Another smirked. "And tell us, Miss Elena, tell us, do you know enough to recommend something suitable for men of our stature?" The question was bait, meant to belittle. Victor said nothing. He only watched. Elena's lips curved faintly. "For men of your stature, then I'd recommend something strong, enough to match your egos, but smooth enough to go down without choking." The table erupted in laughter. Even the men themselves chuckled, impressed by her quick wit. Only Victor's expression remained unreadable, though his eyes glinted with something annoyance. "Yes, but also intrigue," she returned with a bottle of Bordeaux, describing it with eloquence and humor that left the men nodding appreciatively. She poured with steady hands, never spilling a drop, course after course. The game continued. They tried to unsettle her with impossible requests demanding dishes not on the menu, pressing her with questions about vintages and regions, prodding her with subtle insults about class and status. Elena answered each with calm precision, sometimes with facts, sometimes with humor sharp enough to draw laughter, but never blood. The more they tried, the more charmed they became. By the third course, the men were leaning toward her, not to intimidate, but to listen. She had disarmed them without surrender, a balancing act so few could manage, and all the while, Victor Kane sat silent, his fingers steepled, his gaze locked on her like a man watching something he could not control. Dessert arrived, lavender cream brulee and dark chocolate torte. One of the men raised his glass toward Elena. "You're wasted here," he said with a grin. "A mind and a tongue like yours? You should be sitting at the table, not serving it." The others murmured agreement. Only Victor's silence hung in the air like a blade. Elena's smile was polite, but her voice carried weight. "I appreciate the compliment, but I'm not wasted anywhere. I'm exactly where I choose to be." The words landed with unexpected force. The men fell silent, then raised their glasses in a toast not to Victor, but to her. And for the first time in memory, Victor Kane was not the center of attention at his own table. When the guests departed, laughter spilling into the night, Victor lingered behind. The staff pretended to busy themselves polishing glasses and resetting tables, but all eyes were fixed on him and Elena. He stood slowly, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the linen. Elena approached to clear the final plates, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy with expectation. Everyone waited for the strike. Then, in a voice low but carrying, Victor said, "Thank you." The room froze. He had never thanked a server before, not once, not in all the years of his reign over table 12. The words sounded foreign on his tongue, like a language he had long forgotten. Diego nearly dropped the wineglass in his hand. Marcy clutched the edge of a tray to steady herself. The entire staff looked at Elena as though she had pulled the sun out of the sky. Elena didn't bow, didn't curtsy, didn't murmur deferentially like others might have. She simply inclined her head, her voice calm. "You're welcome." There, eyes locked in that moment, a silent duel that no longer felt like war. It was recognition. He had tested, she had endured, and now they stood not as master and servant, but as something rarer, equals, each unsettled by the other. Victor reached for his coat, slipped it on with smooth precision, and gave her one last look. There was no sneer, no smirk, only the faintest trace of a smile, small and fleeting, as though it had escaped him by accident. Then he turned and left, his footsteps echoing against marble, the glass doors closing softly behind him. The staff erupted as soon as he was gone. "He thanked you," Diego whispered, awestruck. "Victor Kane thanked someone." Marcy shook her head in disbelief. The silent rule. It's over. It's gone. He can't unmake that moment. But Elena didn't join their chatter. She only untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Her shift was done. As she walked through the dining room toward the staff exit, she felt eyes following her, not just her co-workers, but the lingering patrons who had witnessed the exchange. They didn't look at her like a waitress anymore. They looked at her like a question they couldn't answer. And outside, across the street, the black sedan idled. Victor Kane stood beside it, coat collar turned up against the autumn wind. He watched her through the glass doors, his expression unreadable save for that faint, reluctant smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It was not the smile of a conqueror, not victory, not domination. It was the smile of a man unsettled, a man reminded that even in a world he controlled, there were some things, some people who could not be bent. Elena stepped into the night, the door swinging shut behind her. She didn't look back, and Victor Kane, the man who had ruled through fear, remained standing there, watching her go, wondering if perhaps for the first time he had finally met someone who wasn't playing his game at all.